The county clerk's office smelled like copy toner and raincoats. A poster about wildfire readiness curled off a corkboard over the reception desk. The red triangle of extreme faded to pink from a dozen summers of sun. I signed the last form where the clerk pointed, and she slid a small metal box toward me like we were doing something we shouldn't say out loud. "Keys," she said. "Tower Road still washed out in places. Four-wheel drive, chains if it gets ugly. You sure you want to go up there before June?" "I want to see it how he saw it," I said, which sounded braver than I felt. She looked at me for a beat, maybe hearing my grandfather in my voice, then nodded. "If the radio rings more than twice after midnight, don't answer." She said it like weather, like good advice that didn't need origin or proof. Before I could ask, a phone trilled behind her. She turned away and I was dismissed. Out in the lot, the rain had that Pacific Northwest steadiness that makes you forget there's any other kind. I loaded the box into my Tacoma, watched the clerk's reflection shrink in the rear view, and pulled onto the county road toward a smear of darker trees on the ridge. The old fire lookout hadn't been manned in 20 years, not officially. My grandfather, Walter Carson, kept going anyway. The ranger district looked the other way. He died on his porch in November with a coffee mug and a pencil behind his ear. The pencil was worn flat like a nail. I still had it in my pocket without knowing why. 3 switchbacks up, potholes appeared that could swallow a raccoon whole. The road narrowed until fir boughs scratched the truck on both sides. When the tower finally crested the ridge, it surprised me by being smaller than memory, perched on its steel stilts like a bird with bad knees. The catwalk was a rectangle of silvered boards. Plexiglass windows were kitted with plywood shutters held back by rusted hooks. The whole thing felt like it had decided to outlast us. I killed the engine. The rain kept talking. Far off, a foghorn moaned from the lake in the valley like a ship forgot the map. I took the key ring from the metal box and climbed the graded stairs, boots clanging the rhythm my grandfather had taught me without calling it a rhythm. 3 slow rungs, pause, 3 more. The kind of pace where you didn't surprise anything that lived in the railings. The lock on the hatch turned like it had been waiting for me in particular. Inside, the air had a spice to it. Old coffee oils, mouse dander, books that had been breathed on by 1,000 evenings. A field desk faced the windows, its surface scarred with compass points and ringed with cup stains. A metal footlocker sat beneath it. On the wall, a topo map had been pricked with pins in 4 colors. Beneath the map, someone, Walter, had written a legend that was not the Ranger District's legend. Red for siding, blue for track, green for sound, yellow for other. Other, I said. The word tasted like a dare. The footlocker held what you'd expect. Wool blankets, a whisper-thin first aid kit, a lantern with soot ghosting up its glass, tins of matches, a rain shell that still smelled like him, pipe tobacco and sap and that clean bite of cold that never fully leaves canvas. Beneath the blankets lay a leather book the color of wet bark, edges darkened by thumbs. My name was on a paper band around it, Nathaniel, in block letters that tried and failed not to be tired. I sat on the stool and untied the band. The cover creaked like an old door in a church. The first page was dated June 12, 1979. If you're reading this, you already know better than to laugh. My grandfather's handwriting leaned forward, stubborn as a boot print. You will be told stories about weather and lightning and booze. Let them tell those. Write these instead. Page after page, he wrote the way he built fences, straight lines, proper posts, no flare. Air temperature, wind direction, Moon phase, time on the clock and time as the day felt in his bones. He wrote what he heard, the way the gullies chittered when fog dropped, how the switchbacks tapped, always three, then three. He described a night in August when the sky laces rode the thermals above the ridge like laundry come to life, and a dawn when something left a bundle of willow sticks tied with cedar root on the catwalk, a crow feather tucked into the knot like a signature. He drew sketches the way a man sketches when he's not trying to be an artist, just enough to get the angle of a shin, the spread of a hand. He never met a metaphor he trusted. The things he couldn't nail to the page, he didn't name except with the names he made up and didn't apologize for. Switchbacks, because they moved in angles like the road. Gullies, because they hugged the low ground like water with teeth. Sky laces, because once you call something a tulip poplar winged seed come wrong, you start losing the thread of the real thing. Some entries were short as a weather report. Some were stories that took 3 evenings to tell, and then there were the warnings. Scattered at first, then gathering, then braided into something like a code. New moon is hunger, feed the boundary, don't test it. Channel 9 after midnight is not for you. If it rings twice, let it ring a third. If it rings a third, go outside and touch the map. Never mark a tree inside the broken loop. Those scars are not ours. I flipped ahead, curiosity hopping rungs. 20 years went by in a thumb. Then I saw the first date that stopped me, November 18, 2024. The handwriting was Walter's. The pencil pressure was his. The man had been dead for 2 weeks. If the foghorn stops mid-blast, do not step off the catwalk. There will be ground where ground is not. The rain pressed closer to the glass as if trying to read with me. My scalp prickled the way it does when your body knows before your brain. I looked up. The room was 1 story up but felt higher, like the sky had scooted down to rest its elbows on the roof. I walked to the map and stood very still. The pins weren't random. They rarely are. Red sidings clung to the spine of the ridge, staying off human trails with an etiquette that felt older than any posted sign. Blues, the tracks, braided down into the draws where water pooled and was slow to leave. Green sound circled the tower and then stopped, like something respected a line it didn't have to. Yellow other spotted like pollen on the wind. At the bottom corner of the map, Walter had penciled in a loop that wasn't on the topo, broken loop. The line had a gap at the north notch like a mouth missing a tooth. In the gap he'd written, hollow. The radio on the shelf wore dust like velvet. I wiped the dial with my sleeve and clicked it on out of habit I didn't believe I had. The speaker hissed, cracked, then settled into the low rush of air you get when you tune between lives. I set it to channel 9 because the clerk had said not to. It felt like shaking hands with an electric fence to prove to yourself you still could. The first tap came then. A neat, patient knock on steel. 3 taps, pause. 3 taps, pause. It came from the catwalk left side, the kind of sound made by knuckles that understood how metal liked to be touched. I told myself it was thermal expansion, the rain cooling the catwalk faster than the supports. Metal groans, it does. Every mechanic knows steel sighs and tightens as if it has opinions. I stood anyway. The stool rasped the floor. Another 3 taps, right side this time. The rain brightened for a breath and then went back to steady. A fog curled up from the valley like someone rolling a blanket. Down in the lake, the horn moaned its path and then stopped mid-note. Silence isn't silence out here. It has textures. The rush of rain, the hiss of needles, the little shushing sigh of cloud against mountain. This was the kind of silence that takes music away from itself. I walked to the door because the logbook said not to step off the catwalk when the horn stops, and sometimes the only way to prove you believe a rule is to put your hand on the doorknob and then choose not to turn it. The radio crackled. Twice. A ring that wasn't a ring, but I had heard enough night dispatch in the shop to know how something calls you that shouldn't. Channel 9, I said, to the empty air, to my dumb bravery, to my grandfather in the seams of the place. I hear you. It rang again. I reached and laid my palm flat on the map. Warm. Paper shouldn't be warm unless you've just breathed on it. The warmth moved under my hand like sap. I kept my palm there because the logbook told me to, because sometimes you let the dead man drive. Outside, on the left, something exhaled against the window, slow, curious. Not fog, which leaves a smear. Not a raccoon, which would pat, snuffle, scratch. A presence. The plexiglass fogged in a human oval but wider, the height of a linebacker, the width of a fence post. I lifted my hand from the map. The paper cooled as if embarrassed at having been caught. Walter, I said, not to the radio, not to the room, and not, if I'm honest, to my grandfather. The radio, polite as an uncle, answered anyway, with my name. Not Nate the way most people say it, not Nathan the way a DMV says it, but Nathaniel. I didn't think about how I'd promised myself I wouldn't answer if it rang thrice. I didn't think about the clerk's flat warning that sounded like weather. I picked up the mic because we are very brave when we are very stupid. "What do you want?" I said, but it came out, "What do I do?" The voice that came had my grandfather's cadence and none of his breath. "Trade fairly." The foghorn started again, finishing the note it had swallowed, and the world's regular order came back like a generator kicking in. Rain, steel settling, far-off traffic on the highway that drifts between trees and never sounds like cars. On the catwalk, a small sound, something being placed. I opened the door and stepped into the wet. The rule about the catwalk was for when the horn stopped mid-blast. It had finished now. The boards shone with rain like new varnish. At the far corner, right of the door, someone had left me a bundle. Willow twigs tied with cedar root, neat and compulsive. A black feather was tucked in the knot. "Trade fairly." The radio whispered behind me, tinny now, almost embarrassed by its own superstition. I don't know what a fair trade is with a thing that breathes fog on glass. I know what it is with a man, hours for dollars, skill for respect. I took the bundle inside because I wasn't going to leave a gift on a wet porch like a fool. I set it on the desk beside the logbook. I dug into the footlocker and found what I didn't know I'd been looking for. A Ziploc bag labeled jerky in my grandfather's block letters. It was hard as masonry and smelled like pepper and history. I took a strip, put it on a tin plate, and set it on the catwalk railing under the eave where rain wouldn't find it. I didn't say thank you because either that's not how this works or that's exactly how this works and I wasn't going to get it wrong. Back inside, I shut the door and locked it because locks don't stop anything that can learn steal, but they make us feel like we've done our part. I sat and opened the logbook to the page with the date that shouldn't exist. My grandfather had added a line below the warning about the foghorn that wasn't there a minute ago, and I would bet my truck on it. Good. My hand shook. I put my palm on the map again and waited for the page to warm. It didn't. Paper, once it knows you know, plays it straight. The rain slowed. The tower creaked the way old houses tell you they're not ghosts, they are wood. Down in the valley, a siren wound up and wound down. The radio sat quiet, the mic coiled like a sleeping snake. On the catwalk, something took the jerky without hurry. I heard the plate slide a hair, metal on metal. A single knock followed, then another. 3 in a set, with the patience of someone who had practiced being patient for longer than our flag has had its current number of stars. Trade fairly, I said to the empty room and wrote the time, wind, and moon phase in my grandfather's hand because mine wasn't steady enough yet to look like me. When the fog came back around after midnight, it tasted like pennies. The radio rang twice. I didn't answer. Something pressed a 5-fingered pad against the plexiglass and held it there like a promise. The glass fogged and cleared in the rhythm of a breath. I counted. It matched mine by the third inhale. I raised my hand and set my palm against the print from inside. My skin was warm. The pad on the other side was warmer. Walter's line, a voice said without the radio's help, weakens. The foghorn stopped mid-blast. The world ducked away. And even with my body leaning toward the door, even with every dumb human part of me wanting to step out and prove to myself that the catwalk is always there when it looks like it's there, I didn't move. My hand stayed on the glass. The thing on the other side didn't push, didn't test the latch, didn't do anything except share heat through a barrier we both pretended was more than it was. When the horn finished its note, the pad lifted. The 3 taps came again, farther away this time to the right, then down the stairs, then lost to rain. I breathed. The tower breathed back. I wrote trade made, plate taken, pad warm. I underlined warm twice because of all the stupid miracles you expect when you climb a lonely ladder into weather and questions. Warmth is the one that makes you forgive things you probably shouldn't forgive. I turned the radio off. I left the logbook open. I slept on the floor beside the desk because the cot smelled like mice, and because the desk felt like a spine, and because my grandfather had taught me some things you don't remember learning until you need them. When I woke, the willow bundle had left a damp oval on the desktop. The cedar root had shrunk, tightening the knot as if it didn't want to be untied by daylight. And the map had a new pin. Yellow. Other. Placed exactly where a man with a warm hand had pressed against the glass. The tower doesn't sleep the way houses sleep. It ticks and exhales like a body that expects you to stay up with it. My first morning up here, I woke to beams of sun cutting through gaps in the shutters, painting stripes across the desk. The willow bundle was still there, feather trembling in the draft. The logbook lay open where I'd left it, pencil rolling like it had tried to finish a sentence without me. Coffee from the camp stove tasted like rust scraped off the pot, but it warmed my chest. I walked the perimeter of the catwalk, scanning the forest below. Fog peeled back from the ridges like a slow tide. Nothing moved except a hawk riding thermals. For a moment, I could almost believe last night had been storm, dream, and loneliness. Then I saw the yellow pin on the map again, exactly where the warm handprint had been. Proof doesn't need to shout. It just waits until you're ready to stop lying to yourself. I spent the next hours exploring the lookout, wanting to know what Walter had hidden. The supply closet door stuck until I leaned shoulder into it. Inside was a museum that smelled of dust, cardboard, and something sharper, like preserved hides. Shelves bowed under the weight of jars and tins. Each was labeled in Walter's hand. Soil sample, hollow ground, 1986. Feather, type unknown, 1991. Hair, unclassified, 2003. Some jars contained things better left vague. Scraps of hide too elastic for deer. A jawbone with teeth too human for comfort. On the floor sat old audio reels in battered boxes, spines scrawled with notes. Whistles, July 1982. Tapping, Winter Fog, 1994. Next to them, cassette tapes labeled simply CH. 9. I turned one over in my palm and felt a chill. The plastic was warm, just like the map last night. I set it back carefully. Pinned along the wall were topographic maps. Some were standard USGS issues, edges curled from use. But layered over them, taped and stitched together, were Walter's maps. And they weren't the same. Whole ridges bent differently. Streams cut where USGS showed none. Black pencil traced loops that ignored official survey lines. And in red grease pencil, thick and certain, he had drawn safe lines, arcs that matched burned scars I'd seen driving up, and old firebreak scars the Forest Service hadn't maintained since the 70s. To the Forest Service, they were random remnants of wildfires. To Walter, they were boundaries, places the tenants wouldn't cross or couldn't. I leaned closer. In the corner of one map he'd written, "Lines aren't ours. Lines burn themselves." My scalp prickled. Had the forest drawn its own borders, fire as handwriting? I pulled one of his trail cams from a plastic crate. Old model, battered casing, but when I slid in fresh batteries, the screen blinked to life. The SD card still had files. I scrolled past frames of raccoons, a bear nosing an elk carcass, the kind of wildlife you expect. Then I froze. Timestamp 02:11 a.m. 3 weeks ago. The frame was skewed, grainy, infrared wash. But in the middle stood a figure tall, at least 7 feet, shoulders narrow, limbs long. A switchback, if Walter's names were right, not caught mid-stride, not stumbling into frame like wildlife. Its knees bent slowly, carefully, as it stacked stones into a cairn on the game trail. It placed one last stone, tilted its head toward the camera, and held perfectly still. Its eyes flared white with the IR light, reflective, deliberate. Then it stood and walked out of frame as if it knew it was being recorded. My throat went dry. Walter hadn't just been documenting. They'd been showing him things on purpose. The wind shifted outside, rattling the shutters. Somewhere down in the valley, the foghorn moaned its long note. This time it didn't stop mid-blast. But I still found myself staring at the trail cam image, the cairn glowing faintly in grayscale, and wondered who it was built for, my grandfather or me. The trail cam shows the 7-foot switchback placing the cairn, pausing to acknowledge the camera. The second night in the tower was worse than the first, not because of what I saw, but because of what I expected to see. Every shadow felt rehearsed. Every gust of wind auditioned as something else. I brewed coffee I didn't need and kept the lanterns burning, even though Walter's note said never to leave too much light on the catwalk. It blinds your eyes to what wants to be seen. I told myself I'd just check the perimeter before bed, make sure the shutters were latched. That's when I heard it again, 3 knocks on steel, patient, even. I froze, then 3 more, but not in the same spot. This time it came from the southern catwalk just outside the window that faced the ridge. The rhythm wasn't random. It carried the cadence of a code. I'd worked summers as a mechanic for the county fire crews. My grandfather had taught me old ranger signals when I was a kid. Tap patterns you could use across valleys when radios died. This one spelled N. Pause. Then A. Pause, then a stumble of taps that didn't make sense. My name, Nathan, not finished but close enough to chill my spine. I did the dumb thing, I tapped back. 3 knuckles against the desk, clumsy compared to steel on steel. The pattern outside shifted immediately, quickening to match mine, not copying, teaching. Slowing when I slowed, pausing longer as if to say, "This is how we talk." My heart hammered so loud I worried it would answer for me. I tapped again. Deliberately, 123, pause, 12, pause, old ranger for OK. The reply was immediate. The taps arranged themselves into a longer phrase, stumbling, searching, until I realized what it was spelling in broken code. U. Lantern light shook on the glass. I backed up, breath ragged, and the rhythm followed me. Each of my inhales echoed as a tap. It wasn't just mimicking, it was measuring. Then silence. I dared to lean close to the plexiglass. That's when it happened. A shape moved up from below, slow as if not to spook me. A hand, 5 long fingers splayed, pressed against the window. Not claws, not nails, pads wide and soft, fogging the glass in an oval. I lifted my own hand without meaning to. Inches of plexi between us, our palms lined up, my skin prickled. The pads outside flexed once as though confirming something, and then it hummed. Not a growl, not a whistle. A tone. Low, steady, sliding into a harmony above my own shallow breath. A third exactly. My voice lifted. The glass vibrated faintly under my palm. I couldn't pull away. The sound wasn't just in my ears. It was in my chest cavity, shaking bone and blood like the forest had found a way to breathe me into its choir. And just as I leaned forward, heart slamming, mind screaming that I should run, the lantern guttered. Darkness swallowed the room except for that hum. A 5-fingered hand with pads, not nails, presses to the plexiglass and hums a third above Nate's breath, vibrating the tower itself. The second night in the tower was worse than the first, not because of what I saw, but because of what I expected to see. Every shadow felt rehearsed. Every gust of wind auditioned as something else. I brewed coffee I didn't need and kept the lanterns burning, even though Walter's note said never to leave too much light on the catwalk. It blinds your eyes to what wants to be seen. I told myself I'd just check the perimeter before bed, make sure the shutters were latched. That's when I heard it again, 3 knocks on steel, patient, even. I froze, then 3 more, but not in the same spot. This time it came from the southern catwalk just outside the window that faced the ridge. The rhythm wasn't random. It carried the cadence of a code. I'd worked summers as a mechanic for the county fire crews. My grandfather had taught me old ranger signals when I was a kid. Tap patterns you could use across valleys when radios died. This one spelled N. Pause, then A. Pause, then a stumble of taps that didn't make sense. My name, Nathan, not finished but close enough to chill my spine. I did the dumb thing, I tapped back. 3 knuckles against the desk, clumsy compared to steel on steel. The pattern outside shifted immediately, quickening to match mine, not copying, teaching. Slowing when I slowed, pausing longer as if to say, this is how we talk. My heart hammered so loud I worried it would answer for me. I tapped again. Deliberately, 123, pause, 12, pause, old ranger for OK. The reply was immediate. The taps arranged themselves into a longer phrase, stumbling, searching, until I realized what it was spelling in broken code. U. Lantern light shook on the glass. I backed up, breath ragged, and the rhythm followed me. Each of my inhales echoed as a tap. It wasn't just mimicking, it was measuring. Then silence. I dared to lean close to the plexiglass. That's when it happened. A shape moved up from below, slow as if not to spook me. A hand, 5 long fingers splayed, pressed against the window. Not claws, not nails, pads wide and soft, fogging the glass in an oval. I lifted my own hand without meaning to. Inches of plexi between us, our palms lined up, my skin prickled. The pads outside flexed once as though confirming something, and then it hummed. Not a growl, not a whistle. A tone. Low, steady, sliding into a harmony above my own shallow breath. A third exactly. My voice lifted. The glass vibrated faintly under my palm. I couldn't pull away. The sound wasn't just in my ears. It was in my chest cavity, shaking bone and blood like the forest had found a way to breathe me into its choir. And just as I leaned forward, heart slamming, mind screaming that I should run, the lantern guttered. Darkness swallowed the room except for that hum. A five-fingered hand with pads, not nails, presses to the plexiglass and hums a third above Nate's breath, vibrating the tower itself. I didn't sleep much after the handprint on the plexiglass. Every creak of the tower sounded like knuckles on steel. By morning, I'd convinced myself I imagined it, until I found the faint smear of condensation still drying on the glass. The logbook said one word over and over in different entries: trade. My grandfather left venison, feathers, salt. He always got something back. Bundles of sticks, carved stones, strange knots of root that looked like messages. That night, I decided to test it. From the bottom of Walter's footlocker, I pulled a vacuum-sealed bag marked jerky. It was old but still edible. I tore off a strip, chewed it once to be sure, then placed the rest on a tin plate out on the catwalk railing. The plate glistened in lantern light like an offering bowl. I waited. Hours passed. The forest groaned in its normal ways, wind dragging through the firs, an owl cutting the silence. Nothing else. I was just about to give up when I heard a shuffle. Not on the catwalk, on the ground below. Low, skittering. A shadow moved between trunks, too many joints bending at the wrong angles. A gully. It moved like a cross between a badger and a spider, body low, paws wide, shovel-shaped. In the faint light it hesitated, sniffing at the air. Then, with jerks of unnatural grace, it scaled the base of the tower. My breath caught. I thought it would climb to the catwalk. Instead, it stopped at the edge of the lantern glow. Something clicked in its throat like stones tapping together. It darted forward, snatched the jerky in a hand-like paw, and retreated into shadow. My heart hammered. The tin plate rattled where claws had scraped. When I dared to check again, something else sat on the plate. A stone, smooth, round. A natural hole bored through its center. Around the rim, cedar root had been threaded into a crude loop, as if it was meant to be worn. A seeing stone. I brought it inside, set it on the desk, and compared it to the logbook. One of Walter's sketches showed 3 identical stones, each labeled with dates and places. He'd drawn them against a star chart, lines connecting the holes to constellations. Curious, I held the new stone up to the lamplight and glanced at Walter's chart. The hole aligned with 3 stars, but only when the chart was turned to the page marked New Moon. A message or a warning. I set the stone down carefully, not sure if I'd just accepted a gift or agreed to a contract. That's when the CB radio on the shelf snapped awake. Static hissed, then a voice, dry, tired, and familiar. Nathaniel. My chest locked. It was my grandfather's voice. The mic trembled in its cradle, though no hand touched it. The hiss thinned to words, whispered, almost reverent. Trade fairly. The CB radio on Channel 9 hisses Nate's name in his grandfather's voice, repeating the same warning. Trade fairly. The stone from the gully sat on the desk all morning, catching sunlight through its drilled hole like an eye that refused to blink. I tried to ignore it, but my gaze kept slipping back. Walter's note said safe lines, burned scars, fire breaks, natural borders were what held the tenants back. But maps can lie. By noon, I decided to test one. I strapped Walter's old GPS to my wrist, clipped a GoPro to my jacket, and traced my finger over the map until I found a place Walter had marked with 2 words in block capitals: hollow ground. The line cut across a notch in the ridge, less than a mile from the tower. The trail was overgrown, pine needles muffling my steps. Birds chattered, squirrels scolded, normal forest noise, almost enough to fool me into thinking last night's radio call hadn't happened. But when I reached the painted fence post, Walter had set at the boundary, everything stilled. No birdsong, no wind, just a kind of waiting silence as if the forest wanted to see if I'd be dumb enough to cross. I was, one step over the line. The GPS ticked step 1. I counted out loud to match. 2, 3, 4, 12 steps total before I stopped and turned back. Nothing dramatic happened, no lightning, no roar from the trees, just silence. Back at the tower, I checked the GoPro footage. My stomach clenched. On video, I only took 9 steps. 3 were missing, vanished from the recording like they never happened. The GPS said 12. My body remembered 12, but the footage disagreed. I replayed it 5 times, hoping for a glitch. Each time the screen jumped, skipping 3 steps in the middle of the crossing, like the forest had edited the tape, like those steps existed somewhere else. I was still staring at the screen when the radio crackled. Sheriff McCall's voice cut through, flat and businesslike. "Nate, you copy. Ridge span trucks are on the move, 10 miles out, permits approved." Her words hit me harder than the missing steps. The tenants weren't the only thing closing in. Sheriff McCall radios the warning. "Ridge span trucks are 10 miles out, permits approved." The sheriff wasn't kidding. By the 3rd day, I heard the rumble of engines in the valley, diesels grinding where only wind and water had ever carried sound. Ridge span was moving in. Their paperwork called it exploratory drilling, test cores, seismic mapping. Just science, they'd say, but Walter's logbook had a different kind of science. I flipped through pages until diagrams caught my eye. Rough cross-sections of the ridge, shaded lines where aquifers ran, annotated with his cramped handwriting, primary spring, secondary seep, bone seam. At first, I thought he was just noting water sources for firefighting. Then I saw the way he'd drawn the root crown. Not a tree, not exactly. More like a knot of roots that touched every spring in the ridge, and next to it in block letters, organ. An organ of what? The forest, the tenants. The more I read, the colder I felt. Walter described the aquifer as a living lung, the thing the tenants defended above all. Take the water and you bleed them and they answer. By dusk, I'd hiked down to where Ridge Span had flagged orange tape along the logging road. Fresh survey markers stabbed into snow. My boots crunched, but around one flag the ground felt wrong, spongy underfoot. I knelt, brushing away powder. There was no snow beneath, just a circle of moss, perfect, green, lush, 10 feet across in the middle of white winter ground. My breath fogged, hanging heavy. The circle was dry as bone, and in its center one boot print, deep, human, facing downhill. I scanned the tree line, every nerve screaming. Sheriff's voice crackled on the radio again, faint this time. "Nate, you heard. One of Ridge Span's surveyors didn't come back. They're organizing a search party." I stared at the print, at the impossible moss. The forest had already found him. A Ridge Span surveyor goes missing. Nate finds a perfect circle of dry moss in the snow with a single boot print in its center. Twilight hits different up here. The ridge doesn't slip into dark so much as it holds its breath, waiting for the sun to lose its grip. Walter had a name for it in his logbook, the Blue Hour. That evening I finally understood why. The last light faded and the forest began to glow, not bright, not enough to see by, but every branch and ridge line turned indigo as though the world had been rinsed in ink. And then the sound started. At first, I thought it was the wind in the guy wires, a low whistle that tugged at the metal, shivering through the bolts that held the tower up. But when I laid a hand on the railing, I felt it vibrating in time with something outside. High above they came, sky laces, shapes gliding between the trees, not quite bird, not quite bat. Wings stretched translucent, catching the last light like stained glass. They circled in spirals, dipping and climbing, and with every motion their bodies resonated, a harmony layered and uncanny until the tower itself thrummed like a tuning fork. Bolts squealed, the desk rattled, my chest vibrated with their chords. I scrambled for Walter's notes. His entries from the 80s blew hour harmonics, not random, matches siren chart. I flipped back to see the page. He'd drawn the county fire lookout siren codes, the ones used for evacuation drills in the Cold War years. I listened harder, 3 long pulses, 1 short, silence. Exactly the pattern for evacuate valley floor. They weren't just singing, they were warning. My hand shook as I scribbled the pattern into the margin, comparing tones to Walter's chart. The sky laces kept shifting, weaving new codes, prepare to move uphill, evacuate fire line, ancient voices using our language, or had we once borrowed theirs. The harmonics built until my teeth buzzed. I stumbled onto the catwalk, staring at the ridge. That's when I saw it. At the timberline below, where the indigo thickened into black, something vast stood watching. The root crown. It didn't move, it didn't need to. Even from that distance, I felt its gaze hook into me. My ears went silent, my thoughts weren't my own. A voice bloomed inside my head, deep and tired, more like pressure than words. Walter's line weakens. My knees buckled. The sky lace's harmony stuttered, then fell into silence. The tower was suddenly still. The root crown remained, unmoving at the timberline until the last hint of light died. And then it was gone. The root crown appears at the timberline, and Nate hears its voice inside his head. Walter's line weakens. The county courthouse smelled of floor polish and old microphones. Folding chairs scraped on tile as half the town packed into the chamber. Ranchers in boots, clerks in cardigans, a scattering of ridge-span men in pressed shirts that made them look like they'd never touched dirt. The agenda read simple, public hearing on exploratory drilling permits, but everyone knew it was about jobs. I sat near the front with Walter's leather satchel across my lap. Inside, the logbook, photographs, documents he'd prepared years ago but never filed. The one he circled in red ink read, Endangered Myotis lucifugus roost, Copper Falls watershed. Little brown bats, fragile, protected. The photos showed whole colonies clinging to rafters and cave ceilings, proof that drilling here wasn't just destructive, it was illegal. When my turn came, I stood, throat dry. These aren't stories, I said, holding up the photos. These are records. This watershed is alive in ways you can't replace. You cut into it, you don't just lose trees, you lose everything. A few nods, more blank stares. Then Ridge Span's project manager, a man named Cole Dawson with a smile lacquered on like varnish, stepped to the microphone. "We appreciate the passion," he said, voice smooth as his tie. "And we value this community. That's why Ridge Span has pledged to fund a new wing for the county clinic, state-of-the-art equipment, new jobs, and a new ball field for our kids, because our families deserve more than nostalgia. They deserve a future." The room erupted in applause, clapping, whistles, even a standing ovation from the back rows. My folder felt heavier than lead, my words already forgotten. When the hearing adjourned, I stepped out into the sharp evening air, stomach tight. That's when my phone buzzed. A text from Evie, short and frantic, "Call me now." I dialed. She picked up on the first, breathless. She was in the ER, background chaos bleeding through. "Nate, we just admitted one of Ridge Span's drillers. He's screaming about something in the woods, but it's his hand." She paused, voice shaking. "The bones are backwards, mirrored, like they grew wrong from the inside out." I gripped the phone until my knuckles whitened. The courthouse windows glowed warm behind me. Ahead, the ridge loomed in dark silhouette. The forest wasn't waiting anymore. Evie calls from the ER. "A Ridge Span worker's hand bones have grown reversed, as if the forest itself had rewritten his body." The first time I heard the drones, I thought it was hornets. A low, insistent buzz that built into an electric hum above the trees. By midnight, 3 red lights floated over the ridge like eyes searching for heat. Ridge Span had brought in survey drones, infrared cameras swinging beneath their bellies. I watched from the catwalk, heart pounding. The beams raked across the forest, scanning for topography, for resources. Hunting, but blind. Then something I didn't expect happened. The tenants didn't scatter, didn't even hide. One by one they stepped into view beneath the tower. Switchbacks, tall and angled, moving in deliberate patience. Gullies skittering low, clicking like pebbles against tin. Even a glimpse of translucent wings between fir branches, sky laces circling above. Not avoiding the drones, gathering here, under me. Waiting. The hair on my arms rose. Walter's logbook trembled on the desk where I'd left it open. An entry scrawled 30 years ago seemed to glow in the lamplight. "When the line breaks, they will not flee. They will come to you because you are the hinge." I pressed my palms to the railing. Below, the tenants tilted their heads upward, eyes reflecting my lantern in green, gold, white. The drones whined overhead, oblivious, recording everything but the truth. That's when the radio came alive. Channel 9. 2 rings. Static hissed louder than it should. Then a third. Against every warning, every note in Walter's hand, I reached for the mic. My own name slithered through the static, drawn out heavy, "Nathaniel." And then another voice, deeper, inside my skull, so vast it made my teeth ache. "Choose." The root crown had entered the conversation. Channel 9 rings thrice. Nate answers, and the root crown's voice fills his head. "Choose." After the root crown's voice left me shaking on the catwalk, I did what I always do when panic sets in. I turned to Walter's logbook. I don't know what I was hoping for, maybe instructions, maybe comfort, but what I found was something else entirely. As I thumbed through the back pages, the spine creaked. A seam split along the leather binding. My hand brushed something wedged deep inside, a folded oilcloth packet, stiff with age. I laid it on the desk and unwrapped it. Inside were documents I never expected to see in a cryptid hunter's journal. Notarized injunctions, yellowed but official. Wildlife surveys stamped with state seals. Photos of endangered moss, bats, owls, and tucked between them, pages in Walter's slanted hand, written like contracts rather than notes. At the top of one, oath of the line. I read in a whisper, though no one was there to hear. "I keep men out. You keep yours in. Deep forest holds its own, so long as my blood stands watch. Break the oath and the ridge burns." Signed, Walter H. Carson. The ink was countersigned with a blot I first thought was smudge until I looked closer. It wasn't ink, it was resin. Sap hardened into a shape half like a thumbprint, half like something pressed by bark. Walter hadn't just studied them. He had made a pact. He'd promised to guard the ridge from human encroachment. In return, the tenants stayed bound to the deep woods. 40 years of balance, all resting on one man's shoulders. And now, with him gone, the root crown had turned to me. A vibration buzzed against the desk. My phone, Sheriff McCall. The text was a photo, grainy and urgent, fresh bulldozers, orange vests, a strip of raw earth chewed into the ridge, and at the edge of the frame, red spray paint slashed across a charred old fire break. The caption below her photo chilled me. "They cut your safe line, making an access road." I looked from the oath on the desk to the glowing screen in my hand. Walter's deal was broken. Sheriff sends Nate a photo. Ridge span bulldozers have cut across the safe line to build an access road. The morning they brought in the chainsaws, I felt it before I heard it. The forest had gone silent. Not the ordinary hush before rain, not the wary pause when a hawk circles. This was a vacuum, a silence with weight, pressing against my ears until even my heartbeat felt out of place. Then the engines roared. Chains bit into old-growth pine at the edge of the ridge span site. The first spray of sawdust curled into the air like smoke, carried by wind that had stopped blowing moments before. I watched from the tree line half hidden. The workers joked nervously as the first trunk groaned, but when it finally cracked and toppled, the sound didn't echo. It was swallowed as though the forest refused to carry it. That's when I saw movement. A switchback stepped into the clearing. Broad daylight. 7 feet tall, limbs long and deliberate. Its shoulders hunched slightly, head tilted as if studying children at play. And most startling of all, it raised its hands, palms open, empty. The chainsaws stuttered to a stop. Men froze, eyes wide, unsure if they were staring at a man in a suit or something far worse. "Jesus Christ," one whispered. The switchback stood there, palms up, chest rising with slow, even breaths. The forest still held its silence like glass about to shatter. Then one of the younger workers panicked. He raised his rifle and fired. The shot cracked the air, sudden, violent. The switchback didn't move. The bullet struck the dirt at its feet, and then the impossible happened. The casing rolled once, then stopped. The slug itself quivered as if caught by invisible fingers. Slowly, deliberately, it spun, curved, shifted, until it lay etched in the soil, arranged into a perfect spiral. The same spiral Walter had drawn in his logbook beside every entry marked gift. The switchback lowered its palms, still watching. The men stumbled back, chainsaws dropped, the clearing thick with terror and sawdust, and the spiral glistened like a signature. A worker fires at the switchback, but the bullet lands harmlessly in the dirt, then twists itself into a spiral like the tenant's gifts. That night the forest refused to stay in shadow. From the catwalk I saw them first as pinpricks, scattered sparks catching lantern glow. Then more, dozens, hundreds, until the tree line around the tower shimmered like a field of dew, each drop an eye reflecting back at me. Switchbacks, gullies, shapes I couldn't name. The tenants had gathered, not hiding, not circling, simply present. I gripped the railing, lungs tight. Every breath felt borrowed. Then I realized it wasn't just mine. The first note slipped from the dark, low, steady, almost a hum. Another joined higher, weaving above it. Then dozens layered into chords that prickled my skin. The sound wasn't random, it was following me. I drew in a sharp inhale. The chorus inhaled with me. I exhaled, trembling. The voices answered, carrying my rhythm back like a mirror in sound. They weren't just mimicking. They had learned me, my breath, my cadence, my pulse. My chest vibrated until it felt like I wasn't breathing alone anymore, but as part of a choir too large for human lungs. The tower itself trembled, bolts whining against wood, glass fogging with resonance. Behind me, voices rose from the clearing. Ridge Span had set up camp less than a mile downslope. Their foreman, Dawson, had marched closer to watch the spook show, as he called it. I heard him curse through a bullhorn, his voice cracking under the weight of what he saw. Then panic took him. He bolted uphill, flashlight beam slashing. Straight toward the boundary Walter had marked 100 times, hollow ground. I shouted until my throat burned, but the wind swallowed it. The fog rolled in thick, folding itself like curtains closing. Dawson's beam swung once, twice, then winked out. Gone. The tenant's harmony didn't break. It just shifted lower, fuller, like a hymn sung for the newly vanished. And I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest had just claimed him as easily as a lung draws breath. Ridge Span's foreman, panicked, flees into hollow ground. The fog folds shut around him, and he vanishes. The morning after Dawson disappeared, the ridge bloomed with uniforms. State police trucks clogged the logging road, blue lights pulsing against the firs. Federal inspectors in windbreakers unrolled topo maps on the hoods of SUVs. Even a few men I pegged as military contractors kept their sunglasses on, though the sky was overcast. Sheriff McCall found me at the tower base, jaw tight, hat low. She didn't waste words. "Listen, Nate, we need a story. Something clean, something they'll accept." I knew what she meant. Nobody here was ready to hear about switchbacks or harmony that borrowed your lungs. Tell them the truth and they'd send bulldozers twice as fast, followed by guns. So I opened Walter's satchel and spread out the packet he'd hidden in the logbook. Endangered species surveys, wildlife photos, maps of fire hazard zones. "This ridge is a tinderbox," I said, pointing to a shaded overlay Walter had drawn decades ago. "One spark from Ridge Span's drills and you've got a crown fire straight into town. And these," I slid out the photos of Myotis bats clinging to cave rafters. "These roosts are federally protected. You can't legally bulldoze through them." McCall's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "Wildfire closures and bats," she said. "That'll play better in a press release than monsters." By noon, the ridge was roped off with bright fire danger, area closed placards. A state biologist, bought or convinced, nodded gravely at the critical habitat photos. Ridge Span's men fumed, but legal walls go higher than steel. I thought maybe for a breath we'd bought time. Then I heard the thump. A news chopper banked over the ridge, blades knifing the mist, its camera tilted straight at the tower, at me, and the forest moved to answer. From the treetops, shapes unfurled, sky laces, translucent wings catching the air. Dozens, then hundreds, rising like kites on invisible string. The rotor wash collided with their current. The chopper shuddered, stammered, dipped. The pilot fought the stick as wings blurred against plexiglass. For one impossible moment, machine and creatures locked in the same sky. Then the rotors stalled. A news chopper tilts toward the tower. Sky laces rise in swarms, colliding with the rotor wash until the blades stall midair. The night after the chopper nearly dropped into the ridge, the forest fell into a silence so complete it felt rehearsed. No whistling switchbacks, no chittering gullies. Even the sky laces had folded themselves into absence. Only one thing broke the stillness. On the catwalk railing where I'd left Walter's plate, something waited. The seeing stone. The same one the gully had given me days ago, except it wasn't the same. The hole was no longer smooth. Around its edge, someone or something had carved a looping mark. At first glance it looked like a noose, a circle with a tail. But the longer I stared, the more it felt like a loop closing back on itself. An unbroken circuit. I turned it in my hand. The cedar root cord had been replaced with a strip of woven grass, still damp as if it had just been braided. For a sick moment I thought it was a warning, a threat, a death mark, but Walter's notes whispered otherwise. I flipped through the logbook until I found a sketch almost identical, a looped mark inked beside the words "Vow Not Warning." I remembered the root crown's voice in my skull, "Choose." This wasn't a threat, it was a bond, an offer. My hand shook as I set the stone on the open logbook. The loop mark seemed to glisten against Walter's cramped handwriting. I told myself I wouldn't take it further, that I'd just observe record as Walter had. But my body didn't listen. Almost without choice, I pressed my palm flat against the page. The ink bled upward, not spilled, crawled. Black lines seeped from the paper into my skin, threading veins that weren't there a second before, creeping, curling under the surface like rootlets under bark. It didn't hurt, but it burned, not fire, not ice. A knowing burn. I yanked my hand away, heart racing. But the marks remained, faint lines coiled beneath the skin of my palm, like the forest had signed me. The loop wasn't just on the stone anymore. It was in me. Nate lays his palm on the logbook. The ink creeps under his skin like under bark, binding him to the vow. The marks on my palm still hadn't faded. Thin black veins looped just beneath the skin, like something written into me that no amount of soap or denial could scrub out. I went back to Walter's logbook, flipping pages I'd already read, hoping the act of rereading would make the lines in my hand less real. That's when I found it, a thick envelope tucked behind the back cover, wax sealed, my name on the front in Walter's steady block letters. Not Nathaniel, not Nate, just 3 words. When they asked, I hesitated, then cracked the seal. Inside were lists. Names, places, some typed, some handwritten, dates scrawled in margins. Next to each name was a note: kept River Line, Oregon, 1971. Held Ridgeline, Catskills, 1959-84. Failed Appalachia, 1963, burn. My stomach tightened. These weren't random people. They were like Walter, like me, a network of watchers. People who had taken oaths, guarded boundaries, kept old deals that no government ever acknowledged. People who had sacrificed normal lives to keep the rest of the world blind and safe. I flipped to the last page. The final entry had only one sentence, written in Walter's firmest hand. If they find you, you are already part of it. I sat back, the weight of it pressing down. I wasn't chosen by accident. I was inheritance. Continuation. Before I could process more, the radio on the shelf snapped to life. Channel 9 hissing louder than before. Not my grandfather's voice this time, younger, shaky. A boy's whisper threaded through static. "Anyone copy? I think we fed the wrong thing on the wrong night." The mic popped, static surged, then silence. I stared at the radio, heart pounding. Somewhere out there, another watcher, or someone trying to be, had just made a mistake. And mistakes never go unanswered. On Channel 9, a teenager's voice whispers in panic. "We fed the wrong thing on the wrong night. The tower doesn't feel like mine anymore. It feels like a classroom." The logbook sits open on the desk, its pages swollen with rain stains, grease, and ink. My own handwriting now weaves among Walter's, less steady, but filling the margins the way he once did. And across from me, by lantern light, another pair of hands scribbles notes. Her name is Mara, 17. Quiet, sharp-eyed, more patient than I was at twice her age. She found me after the call on Channel 9. The voice I'd heard, "We fed the wrong thing," had been her brother's. He hadn't survived the mistake, But she came anyway, climbing the ridge with nothing but a backpack and a ham set, asking questions no one else dared. So now I teach her. On the catwalk, I drum the taps against steel. 1, 2, 3, pause. She mirrors me, stumbling at first, then finding rhythm. I show her how to leave trade gifts. Salt, jerky, a strip of cloth soaked in cedar oil. We watch from the desk as a gully collects them and leaves a bundle of woven twigs in return. The map on the wall is not the Usk's version. I tell her so. She already knows. It's not a map, I say, tracing Walter's safe lines with a fingertip. It's a heartbeat. You keep it beating, they stay inside. You let it falter, they spill. She nods, eyes wide but steady, and the root crown approves. It hasn't spoken words since the night it branded me, but sometimes when Mara sits with me and the forest breathes in sync, a hum rolls through the ridge. Not thunder, not wind, a vibration in bone, in soil, in steel, approval. The boundaries flex, but they hold. Tonight, the lantern swings in its chain, casting a circle of warm light over the floorboards. A battered checkerboard rests on the table between Mara's father, who came looking for her, then stayed when he saw, and Mara herself. They play slowly, her laughter rare but real. Outside, the sky laces rise, their wings catching moonlight as they braid the night sky with silver threads. Their harmonies drift down, not warning this time, but something close to blessing. In the valley, the foghorn moans, long, low, heavy, and this time it doesn't cut out mid-blast. It finishes, whole. Beneath the tower lantern, a father and daughter play checkers while sky laces weave the night sky. The foghorn's blast finishes clean, carrying into silence that isn't empty but kept.